This is Jessica.
And this is Kelly. And this is the Chasing Brighter
podcast. Hello. On today's podcast, Kelly and I welcome my good friend, Samantha Alvarez Benowitz. She is the Director of Clinical Services at the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, or NYPCC. She has close to 20 years of experience working with underserved children and families in the New York City and Philadelphia areas. Prior to working at NYSPCC, she was a Senior Director of Mental Health and Anti-Human Trafficking at Covenant House, New York, the largest youth shelter in New York City. And she has held clinical and managerial roles at Good Shepherd Services, a foster care agency based in New York City. A little bit more about NYSPCC. It was founded in 1875, and it is the first child protection agency in the world. Its founders wrote the basic tenets of child protection laws in the U.S. that we still use today. It remains dedicated to reducing the incidences and impacts of child abuse and neglect through prevention programs that improve the safety of children. Their mission is to respond to the complex needs of abused and neglected children and those involved in their care by providing the best counseling, legal, and educational services that they can offer. Check out this great interview with Samantha Alvarez Benowitz. We are interviewing all of our friends who we think are doing amazing things and amazing work. And so, today we just wanted to hear a little bit about your story, about the work that you do, how you got into the work that you do, and why, what you're doing is important. So thank you again for joining us today.
You're welcome. All right. So you want me to just start with what I'm doing now and then what I've done before? Okay, great.
Sure.
So I am a licensed clinical social worker. I graduated from Penn back in 2005. Actually, I guess I'm going back and then I'm going to go forward. And initially worked at a foster care agency that I had worked at before I went to grad school. It's called Good Shepherd Services. I was a social worker there in a group home for teenage girls. And I've always been interested in working with young people who've been in the child welfare system or who've been impacted by the child welfare system, by abuse, neglect, having had things go wrong for them in their early childhood and adolescence. And working at this group home was really, helpful for me in terms of learning to work with these young people. I was a direct practice therapist there, and eventually sort of moved up and was supervising. I left for about 7 years. I was not working and I was home with my two daughters. And then when they were both in school, I decided that I wanted to go back and work in a similar environment. I went back to Good Shepherd Services actually and worked in that same group home for about a year. And then decided that I wanted to try something different because I basically only worked at the same organization for my entire career. And so I got a job at Covenant House, New York. So Covenant House, at least in New York, Covenant House is throughout the United States and also in Latin America and Canada. But their New York location is their largest location. It's also the largest shelter serving young adults.
Yeah, it's like a homeless shelter for children.
Yeah. So it's a homeless shelter for yes, you can say children, definitely, right? The youngest kids who are there are 16, and then it goes up to 21. So they're young.
Adolescent.
And so I worked supervising the social workers there. And then I eventually led the department, the mental health department, as well as our anti-human trafficking unit there. So the Covenant House works with a lot of young people who have experienced human trafficking, and both, locally in the United States, but then also we do have some young people who come from other countries who've been trafficked. And so just working with them and working with the mental health team there, it was, working with these young people is just, they're incredible. They're incredibly resilient. I've learned a lot about sort of what's happened to them and then how to help them kind of cope and move through the world. because they're so young, right? So they have so much ahead of them, and sort of helping them stabilize at their young age, I think is really impactful and helpful for them for their future. And then a few months ago, I came here to where I'm actually sitting in my office at the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. It's the largest, sorry, not the largest, the oldest child protection agency in the world. It was founded in 1875. And the clinical team here works with young people who've experienced trauma. And then we also work with families where there's been domestic violence, and they've been court ordered to have their visits supervised by a therapist. So I oversee the therapists who work here, and then the clinical services that we do.
Are you seeing anyone clinically? Are you doing any individual therapy now?
I'm not. I'm not. I miss it a little bit, but and I may at some point. But right now, I'm just overseeing the clinicians. One thing that I will be doing soon, actually, but I just still need to be trained, is we have a crisis debriefing program, which is really quite interesting. We work with other, not just youth serving organizations, but other nonprofits in New York City. So far, it's just in New York City, but a lot of them are, our debriefings are virtual, so we probably could do it outside of New York as well. But we work with organizations where something has happened, right? So whether there's been, a child fatality or a staff fatality, or staff have been threatened by their clients, these things happen, unfortunately, in the field that we work in. And so our executive director created a curriculum to work with providers directly when something has happened.
Yeah. That we call that also, or critical incident debriefing. Like I've done some of that here, right? Kind of same thing, but a larger scope. So like if anything happens anywhere in a workplace, they can send in a clinician that will be there to provide help for others. Like I did that when we had the October 1st shooting, and you'd just be kind of sent out to different places to just be a source of support and to help people debrief on what happened. But I feel I'm so interested in where you are now. That's fascinating to me. I was being such a nerd and reading like the 150th anniversary brochure and reading about the history of your organization. And so really at the history, at the core of it, it's kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, kind of what we think of as social services, where they were like finding out children were being abused and neglected and looking at how they could remove them from the home. But now are you guys doing that at all? Because I mean, now that's been centralized, right? And it's a government thing.
Correct. So right now, the Administration for Children's Services, which is the child welfare organization for New York City, that they get involved with, like, if something happens in a family and they have to go out and meet with the family and make a decision about whether or not a child is going to go into foster care. They're the ones who do that. We work with children who've experienced trauma. So more like a little over 50% of the children that we work with, actually it's more than that, maybe it's closer to 70% of the children that we work with have been either in foster care or are involved with ACS. So we work with those young people, again, either if they've been removed or maybe they're staying home with their parents, but something has happened and that's why they've come to the attention of ACS.
And they get a referral, and you guys do a lot of clinical programming.
Exactly. So we do trauma-informed work, and then we also use an evidence-based model called trauma-focused cognitive behavior therapy. We are free, so we don't charge insurance. We don't bill any of the providers. I'm sorry, not any of the providers, any of the organizations who refer. And we feel like that's really important. So any of the young people that we work with, they either have to be foster care involved, or they have to live in a home where they are 200% below the poverty line. So that's those are the young people that we work with, at least clinically. And then we also do this program where we have supervised visits, and we call them therapeutic supervised visits, because a therapist is in the room observing visits and then coaching parents. And then we also have a parenting group. Anybody who's participating in that program with us also attends a parenting group. And
would that be parents that don't have custody of their children?
So for them, yes. So sometimes, 100% the visiting parent does not have custody of their child or children. Who we call the custodial parent, the one where the parent where the children live is either the other biological parent or sometimes it's the foster parent. So sometimes the child is not living with either of their biological parents, and so the custodial parent is a foster parent. But sometimes it's the other parent. So like there might be an incident of domestic violence between two parents. One parent is the one coming to visit, and the other is the one bringing the child for the visits. So we have lots of safety protocols in place. We have separate waiting rooms for families. We have security because, there's often very serious incidents that have happened between the two parents. And so we want to make sure that everybody is safe.
So I know you haven't been with your organization too long, but I mean, in general, just your field, how have you seen it change with COVID, especially just, the remote learning and just what we hear in the news, right, about adolescents and kind of what their struggles are?
Yeah, I think, so in some ways things have been helpful because we've been able to utilize telehealth. It's interesting, at least here at NYSPCC, the adolescents that we work with, we found prefer telehealth. The younger kids, for sure, we think developmentally it's more important for them to come in here, but for our adolescents, we offer both options. And often we're using a hybrid model with them. So sometimes they're coming into the office, sometimes we're meeting with them over Zoom. We've actually found that we've had more consistent appointments being made since we've switched over to this sort of hybrid option, because we don't have people canceling because
they can't get there
because they can't get there, because they're having a bad day or things are difficult, or they got home late from school or whatever's going on, right? So we've had, or they have a doctor's appointment and then they've got to run home, whatever it is. We've actually found that we've had more consistent visits as a result. But I think just in our field, it's been hard. Especially I was working at Covenant House throughout the pandemic, and the staff there were essential workers, right? So they were showing up every single day. There was not a day that the shelter closed. We were open the entire time, which meant that the staff needed to physically be there. And some staff were working from home and or doing sort of hybrid work, but like there needed to be staff there every day, including the mental health staff. Like we made sure that we had staff available the entire time. So it's been a challenge in terms of taking care of yourself, I think, and then also taking care of your clients. That's been really tough, I think, in general in my field.
How is it now, or do you feel it's getting better? Or
I do think it's getting better. I mean, I like to be hopeful always with everything, but I do. I think, people are coming back in. We are able to offer different options, and I think for clinicians, it's nice also to be able to be hybrid. Like I work from home 2 days a week, and I really enjoy that, right? I'm able to get other things done or focus specifically on certain parts of my job when I'm at home. And so I appreciate that. And I think the clinical team here, they also are hybrid, and I think they appreciate having that flexibility as well. So I
think there's such a wealth of resources on the East Coast, or like I know I lived in Philadelphia, right? Like there's like for you to be offering no cost therapy is blowing my mind right now. But I live in Nevada and it's like the wild, wild west, right? Like we're a newer state, we're a newer city. We don't have an organization that has been established since like 1875, right? And so I just think that's so incredible because I know here getting a therapist, I mean, I get texts all the time, hey, I need a therapist. Do you know of anybody? I know everybody I know has a wait list. Yep. Nobody knows taking new people. We're overwhelmed and inundated still. And then I had a mom at my kid's school tell me, I was saying something about the children's learning being impacted by COVID. And And she has like 2 master's degree in education. And she was like, no, they're not. What are you talking about? Our children aren't impacted by COVID. I was like, okay, I don't know what to tell you. But just like, yeah, like Kelly and I were talking, my 6th grader, Dominic, they have a new class because kids were coming back weird. Like that's what the teacher said. She's like, kids weren't like right. And so we're trying to like almost like reintegrate them into society with this new class that's kind of, reprogramming them on how to be a human.
Yeah, socially, it's been like so challenging, right? So I think, I agree. It's been such a challenging time for kids, for adults, for everybody, right? Like we're all getting used to like, okay, now are we wearing masks? Are we not wearing masks? Are we, like, what's happening?
You guys were locked up for a long time. Like the casinos are very important in Nevada. And so the casinos were opened. I look back, you know what I mean? I'm seriously like, we were open by June 2020. And I know there were a lot of restrictions. Not everything was open, but it's like interesting because we went to DC in 2022 spring, and we were like, they were just opening up, and we were like, what? We were just like, whoa, because like the West Coast, it's just totally different over here. And so not that we didn't have rules and regulations, but like it was just totally different.
Well,
totally
you guys could be outside more too.
Absolutely.
I don't know. Like New York, there's been like the sheds of like the restaurant sheds. They're still up, and you're like, I don't want to sit outside in December. Like I don't, I love to eat out, but I don't want to sit outdoors.
Yeah.
There's like heaters, just like.
Yeah, it's
I feel like I was thinking about this the other day where I feel like just eating out has permanently changed for me, right? Like I don't want to do it as much as I used to.
Yeah.
Mostly also, it's just not the great experience, right? The staffing is slow. It's hard to get into the restaurants you may want to go to. And it's just like the whole thing is more of an effort than it used to be, I feel like.
Well, and Kelly knows I have my 3rd child has broken us, and just going in public with my children at this point, it's like, oh, that's overwhelming. So I'm like, oh, we'll just stay, right? We'll just stay in.
It's the 3rd child. My sister has 3 now too, and it's the same thing. She's like, I can't do anything.
You're just tired. You're broken. That's what happens. But and how has that how has that been for you? So you took 7 years off. How was that making that decision, and how was that reentering for you?
I know. So I call it my 7-year maternity leave because I went back to the same agency. I was like, oh, 7 years, nothing's changed. It was hard. I think it was harder, at least personally, for me to leave the field than to re-enter, just in terms of my own mind, like where I was at. Like I was ready to go back. When I went back, but I did not have the easiest time finding a job. So I was really grateful for my old organization for having taken me back. I mean, I left on good terms and I had always a good relationship with them. So I think that obviously that helped. But it was hard. I was trying to like feel out other options possibly, and that was not happening. And I think probably because I had this huge 7-year gap in my resume. And leaving was challenging. I worked really hard in school to get my degree, and I felt like I enjoyed my job a lot. I loved the team that I worked on. I loved the young people that I was working with. But I also felt like I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to do both things well. So like being a mom, and then also the job that I had was really intense. Like I was supervising a whole team and they needed me, right? And I felt like I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to do that. So I feel very lucky that I was able to afford not being employed for 7 years. And, my kids are great, and I'm, super glad that they're in school and doing well.
What grades are they in now?
They are in 8th and 5th, which is really great.
Oh my gosh. 8th and 5th. So high school.
Gabby is how old? Jess?
She is 9th. She
started grade. Oh
so I didn't realize that our oldest were so close in age.
I think they're like a year and a half apart because so in New York, the cutoff is, December 31st.
That's
So
right.
like both of my kids are fall babies. So like Sonia is still 12, but she's in 8th grade. So she'll be 13
Okay.
next month. And then Eleanor is in 5th grade and she turns 10 in the end of November.
And
So
Samantha's children are very tiny.
they're
And
very
my children were giant babies. And so you'd be like, oh, your baby is 1 and mine is 5. And you're like, no, she's 4. Jessica, she's 4. You're
Gabby
like,
and
oh.
Sonia. And that you're right. Like Gabby looks like she's like 10 years older than her.
Right, right. Yeah, but that's so fun. And so how do you think, I know Kelly and I talk so much about getting that balance of being, we coined this term self-full instead of selfish, right?
Yeah.
So how do you know when to pour into yourself and then when it goes to the job and the kids and the family? Like, what do you think you do to get that balance?
Yeah. So I often walk to work. So I live about 40 blocks from my job. So it takes like 45 minutes to an hour. I walk through Times Square, which is actually not fun. That part of, but that is actually a little bit stressful because there's like a billion people walking at the same time. But most of my walk is actually very pleasant. And it's like a time where I can like just listen to music or sometimes talk to my mom. Like it's just a time for me to like, I'm by myself, right? Like, and yes, it's in between being home and going to work, but like it is a time that it's just me. And so
and you're getting exercise.
And it's exercise, right? So it's overall like I try to do it every single day. Like I literally have like bought shoes just for my walks. And when I worked at Covenant House, is the same thing. I actually currently work only a few blocks away from my old job. So it's a really nice opportunity for me to do that, sort of be self-full. Because there's other things I do here and there, but I think this is something that's like my consistent, like every day, this is what I do. I could take the subway. The subway would be much faster, but like, it's not really pleasant, especially since COVID. It's like,
yeah. Well, and I'm all about maximizing. Like I prepare so I'm in the burbs, right? So mine's about the drive. Yeah. So it's like my podcast I listen to. I get to the kids' school early and I will have like a magazine or it's like, oh, what am I going to do with this 10 minutes? Listen to meditation, like, maximizing that time and looking like you're saying, okay, I could hop in the subway and be mindless. Yeah. But instead, I'm going to make this a mindful activity that I know will fill my cup, get exercise, good for my heart, good for my health. Yeah. And look at how you can use that time for yourself. Do you think that is what has helped you with burnout? I know, especially in the social work field, right? Such a high rate of burnout. What keeps you going in the work you do? I mean, you're working with abused and neglected children, right? And you have been for a long time. I don't know if this was your experience, but for me, so Samantha and I both went to grad school. We both had worked. I had worked with homeless children, adolescents. You had worked with adolescents who had been abused and neglected. We went to grad school together. And how, I don't know if you had this experience, but I'm like, yeah, they're abused. It's sad. Okay. Blah, blah, blah. Their parents suck. Okay. And then I had a kid. Yeah. And then I'm like crying in session and I'm like, how could these, like I was re-experiencing all of it. And it was harder for me, so much harder. Not that it wasn't hard at the beginning, but you just kind of get used to it. And then it's like you had to re-immerse yourself into it. How was your experience?
Oh, absolutely. Becoming a mom? Spot on, right? Like I think it's true. Like all the work that I had done before grad school, I was not a parent. And even like, the group model that we use here at NYSPCC is called the parenting journey. And I was trained in that when I was not a parent. And I was sort of like, okay, yeah, so I know how to parent and I know how to do all this stuff. And you're right. And like, okay, I care about these kids, but I didn't totally it's not that I didn't understand it. It's just a different level when you have your own kids and you can understand, or you can put yourself in, or you compare these children to your own children, right? Like I think for sure thinking about like, wow, if this had happened to Sonia or Eleanor, what would that be like? Right. So it's definitely harder in some ways to kind of think about it like that. I do find it like it's helpful to utilize supervision, right? I have a wonderful supervisor. I've been very lucky in having really great supervisors, I think, at all my jobs. And so really being able to talk to them about the work that we do, how and if it's impacting me, And I think it, it's easy to say to staff, right? Because I say to my own staff, try to leave it, leave your job at your job, right? And leave your work at work. It's really hard to do that when you're working with families. So I think, I have the boundary of like, I'm not picking up the phone after a certain time, right? Or I'm not checking email after a certain time, but I am thinking about the work that I do probably pretty often. And so I just, I'm aware of it, I think, and that I think has been helpful too. I'm not going to try to say to myself, like, I'm not going to think about this, because sometimes it does require you thinking things through in times when you're, technically not working. So I think just being like open and honest with myself is helpful in terms of just like you said, Jessica, like in terms of burnout, like, just figuring out what do I need? What can I deal with? And I think when you're, at least for me, working with kids, I am always hopeful about their futures. So that really helps me with having those feelings of like helplessness about the work that we do. Like, oh, yeah, we're constantly just seeing kids who've been abused and neglected. It's not getting any better. Like for individual children and families, it is getting better, right? And so that's how I try to think of it too. It's like the impact that we're making on the individual is what's important, right? I would love for there to be no child abuse and neglect ever anywhere, right? But I'm realistic. That's not going to happen, right? So how can we work with the individuals that we work with?
Just taking it one case at a time, one family at a time.
Yeah.
You got interested in this work, what you said, out of college, you started working in this field. Did you always want to do what you're doing? Or, kind of what helped you choose this?
Yeah, I was a psychology major in my undergrad program. And what's interesting, so I always wanted to work with people. I really felt strongly about like trying to understand what makes the mind work and why people do certain things. I don't know if I really knew anything about sort of trauma. I was really not familiar with child welfare, with either the system or the children impacted by it. But I took a social work class in my undergraduate program. And I also interned at a group home for teenage moms that was in Boston. And just the experience working there, taking this class, I really sort of started to think about like, okay, well, where do I want to go with my career? And this seems like a population that would be interesting to work with. I feel like the work is important. And so like I got an internship while I was in college at Good Shepherd Services, at the agency that I ended up working for quite a long time. And I never even heard of them either. I don't even know how I feel like it was like, it was not like really pre-internet, but it was close. Like it was like the late 90s, right? And I was like, I don't know. I don't even know how I found that internship, honestly, but I found it. And like that, I like loved working with the kids that I worked with there. So that was it. That was like, oh, okay, this is where I want to work.
Yeah. Is there anything like if you could go back and give your 18-year-old self advice?
What would it be?
Yeah.
I think it was so, I don't know. I think trying new things and being open to trying things that like are not easy would probably be my recommendation to my 18-year-old self. It's probably my recommendation to myself now too. It's hard sometimes to try things that you think are going to be difficult for you. And I definitely felt that way when I was 18, like starting college. I wanted to do things that like came naturally or would be easy. And so I it's probably the same advice I give myself now, is really try things that are like out of my box, because it's easy to sort of stay in your zone and like what you're comfortable with.
Yeah, I mean, hard things are hard, right? And I try to tell my kids that too, and even myself, which is like, I know when you look back at your career, you look back at the most growth or most rewarding moments. In a lot of ways, they were hard things that you got through and you're proud of yourself for kind of pushing through them. And, but it's hard when you're in it, you know, hard when you're in it or hard when you're trying to do stuff. So I get it.
I agree.
Go ahead, Kel.
Oh, I was going to ask, so it's really cool that you both have gone into this profession and done very different things. And I think it's cool. You think about, I don't know if you talk to like college freshmen, let's say, and it's so hard when you're in college because you really don't know where you're going to end up and you kind of have to pick a direction. And you could end up doing anything, right? Yep. There's no specific, like a police officer or fireman or something, but like mostly everything is a lot broader. But I guess my question to you, Samantha, is like, if you would have chosen a different occupation, what would it have been?
I don't know.
Or what would you like to try?
What would I like to be curious about? I know. I feel like I would do something like possibly in academia. Like I it's really, which is maybe it's somewhat different. Like I think I would have liked to have tried like working at a university. I think, it's sort of like such a time of change, and at least in my life, like a lot happened. I feel like in those 4 years of being in school and grad school too, but more so undergrad. Like it's just getting outside of like your family and your comfort zone, and like so much happens during that time. I think it'd be interesting to work with students in some capacity, whether it was like, and maybe being a professor and like really becoming an expert in a field. I think would probably be really interesting to do and to try.
That's cool.
I feel like that now. I don't know if I would have felt like that like 20 years ago. Like I think, I feel like I probably then was so done with school that I was ready to not be there. But now looking back, I'm like, oh, that seems like an interesting like place to be.
And I was going to say, if you want to share the namesakes of your daughters, and do you have these high aspirations for them, or what's going on? When you named your girls, I was like, damn, she's good. I wasn't thinking that deep.
So Sonia is named after Sonia Sotomayor, which is not, so Sonia was born in 2009, which was when Sonia Sotomayor was, I think, nominated by Barack Obama to be the Supreme Court Justice. So, she's from New York. She's Puerto Rican. I'm Puerto Rican. She's the first, right, Latino even too, or Latinx person to be on the Supreme Court. So, in a way, it was like very easy for us because I was like, oh, that's it. That's who we're naming her after. And then we named Eleanor after Eleanor Roosevelt. Again, I was sort of thinking about people who are aspirational, who believe in social justice, who did a lot of work towards that during, their lives. Obviously, Sonia Sotomayor is still alive, but and Eleanor Roosevelt is also from New York, and my kids were both born in Manhattan. So but that's sort of where I went with both of them. And I would love for them to really embrace, social justice for sure. I think, one of the really nice things about growing up in New York City, which I did not grow up in New York City, so I'm a little jealous of them that they get to grow up here because they're around so many different people all the time. And I think that they move through the world differently than I think a lot of people do as a result, right? Like the kids in their classes are all from different ethnic backgrounds, different racial backgrounds. They learned about like the Stonewall, or at least Sonia in middle school this past year learned about Stonewall riots in like her public middle school, right? So I think it's just they learn about so many different people and they interact with so many different people. It's I'm hopeful that they will continue kind of caring about
and you're cultivating that, right? I mean, you're taking them to protests and marches and trying to.
They've gone to the Women's March. Yep, and we did some stuff for climate change, and So they love Greta Thunberg.
Awesome.
it's again, I shouldn't say it's easy to do in New York, but it's there, right? And so,
and I only know my experience, but I'm always telling Kelly, so my kids are Gen Z and Gen A. And I don't know if it's where my kids are geographically or whatever, but I feel like their generation is just so beautiful,
yeah,
like loving and open and just like totally open-minded.
yeah.
They're like, oh yeah, this is the way things are, right? And I'm like, wow, like so rapidly, they're so rapidly evolving. I'm trying to
Well, they
keep up
take
with
it
them.
for what it is. So they're not like putting these like boundaries or binders, or they just sort of are like, okay, they just,
Yeah.
and that they don't trying to like put it in a bucket. I feel like that's the difference, is like we were raised with these kind of like norms
Yeah.
that they don't have, which is awesome, you know?
I completely agree. Right. Like for us, it's like, oh, okay, we have to think differently, right? Like for them, that's just the way they think, right? So I completely agree.
Yeah. 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 Which I think, I don't know, I think it's beautiful. And I hope they're able to maintain that. And
I
that keeps
agree,
me
Jeff.
hopeful.
Yeah, like I think too, it's like thinking about it like maybe they won't have the same issues we have as a result, right? Like societally, right? Like maybe they'll
Yeah.
just like things will be easier, better,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And then, Kelly and I are always talking about and sharing about our journeys of self-discovery, our spiritual journeys. Are there any books, podcasts, movies, anything that you've kind of exposed yourself to that have helped you along your own journey?
I mean, I don't know if in terms of books or podcasts, but I've found at least like going to yoga has been really like something that has
Yeah.
been, and I will say, so which I started doing when I was in grad school. Like I had never taken a yoga class. This was actually, I stepped outside of my box. I tried a yoga class. But I have found it so helpful with being sort of mindful and reflecting on myself and things like that. And so anytime I can take a yoga class and just do that, it's really very helpful for me.
I think exercise is big for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, you're like, oh, I just walk 40 blocks to and from work. I'm like,
I was trying to do the math, because is it the same? Is it 8 city blocks per mile? So is it 5 miles?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're like, it just
That's
takes me 45 minutes. No big deal. I would be like drenched in sweat. Is there a shower at work?
You're hitting your
I can-
10,000 steps on the way
Yes.
there. That's awesome. There is the sweaty part, I'm sure.
There's the sweaty part. It's like in the summer, it's not so fun. But like in the winter, I'm like, I just get a big coat. Go.
Yeah. Yeah. But
That's
for you, it's
awesome.
it sounds like that mind, the mind body connection.
Absolutely. It's really, I think for me, like even like you were saying, being mindful, it's sometimes too like just going and think and not having to like be thinking all the time,
Yeah.
right? Just being with yourself. It's really nice.
Yeah. Yeah. That I'm just like in awe of you and all that you do. You're so fancy.
So funny. I'm in awe of you guys too.
High building in Manhattan. Who would have known you'd be so fancy? When I talk about you all the time, Samantha, because it was you. We'd have to do group projects in grad school. And I remember we got put together at one time and I was like, oh, I have to only work with this lady because she's amazing. Because I remember I went to your apartment with you and Jason and you were like, I'm a smart worker, not a hard worker. I had not heard that before. And I was like, that's what I am too. And we're like, did you do this? We both were like, I did this, you did this, you did this, you were good. Okay, bam, hand in the assignment. Like I wasn't like him and Hong. We were like, let's get this over with. Let's get this done. We have other things to do. And so every time throughout grad school, I loved partnering with you because we were like, let's just do this.
Just do it. I completely agree. And it's so funny because I still use that term all the time. I'm always like, I'm not like, let's just get it done. Let's be smart. We don't have to spend like a million hours on this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. I remember going to your apartment and looking at pictures of foot issues.
Oh, and Justin
had. We're like, look at this foot, like disease.
All the books and all the things. Yeah, man.
So great. Grad school was fun.
That was some fun times. We were all learning.
Yes.
you know?
Literally all of it, like, it was like, our spouses were learning, we were learning, we were figuring it out. Yeah, it was great.
That was fun.
So were both of you with your now spouses, were they in grad school at the same time you both were too?
Yeah.
Yeah, we all were in school. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
You
Take
too.
care.
Bye.
Thanks for listening and joining us today.
And don't forget to follow us on social media at Chasing Brighter or on our blog, chasingbrighter.com.